Moving on to the 10-mark question, let's have a shot at this. So with reference to figure 2, assess whether an increase in real incomes improves subjective happiness within the UK. So it's an assess question. So why do I agree? Why do I disagree? And firstly, let's just think about why we agree with this topic, why we agree with this statement. As when people have an increase in real incomes, I'm going to say there's also going to be an increase in disposable income. So if individuals, households have an increase in disposable income, this just means they have more income, they have more money left over after tax. And if they have more money after tax, it means they can afford to buy more goods and services, thus increasing the demand for goods and services. And for example, we're saying there's an increase in demand for goods and services, but for example, what type of goods and services could we get an increase in demand for? We could get an increase in demand for necessity goods. As for example, if the disposable income of low-income households rise, it means they can now afford to buy more necessities, for example, more rice, more bread, more food, for example, thus increasing the demand for necessities. And of course, if low-income households, if individuals and households can afford to buy more necessities, how is that going to affect them? That is, of course, going to improve like consumer happiness and more, and in a more holistic image, it's going to improve living standards. And that there is a solid KA paragraph, but of course, there are 2 marks for application, and we have not included any bits of application, and the question is specifically asking us to refer to figure 2, so let's have a look at that. Okay, so it's giving us a happiness rating, and what do we see here? The happiest individuals earn less than £10,000, which is closely followed by the individuals who earn more than £40,000, and the least happiest individuals are the ones who make £10,000 to £20,000. So a perfect bit of application you can include there when you're talking about low income households, you're talking about increased demand for necessities. You can say low income households, E.G, the individuals who earned £10,000 and less, when there is an increase in real incomes, it therefore means they can demand more goods and services. They can demand more necessity goods and services, thus meaning it improves their living standards. And we can see this by the happiness rating, with them receiving the highest happiness rating out of all income brackets, which I believe was 7.31. Yeah, so 7.31. So yeah, that's a really good point and a really good bit of application where that would be enough to get you those 6 out of 6 marks there for that question. Since remember, 6 marks for your actual paragraph, and then there's 4 marks in your 10-mark question reserved for application. And now moving on to evaluation, how would I evaluate this 10-mark question? Now, of course, I think that there are quite a few easy evaluation points here, but I am also going to try use figure 2. But the first one that comes to my mind is, of course, like the concept of materialism. Of course, we're just saying here that when people make more money, they're happy. But of course, you've probably heard of stories of people that win the lottery and very unhappy, or like rich people who are very unhappy. But yeah, so you could state the fact that just being able to afford more goods and services does not guarantee happiness. Also, let's just break down the figure itself. So let's just think about using our brains. It's talking about subjective happiness. So firstly, the first thing we can say is very subjective. But if I asked you how happy you are right now, you could be the same level of happiness as someone else, and another individual, but still give totally different ratings. So of course, happiness is very subjective, and it's not something you can easily measure. So you can definitely talk about the limitation of this study itself, since happiness is a very hard thing to measure, as you guys probably know. Thus, it's very hard to give it a rating which is accurate. So the word that evaluation point is, however, in evaluation, this depends on the validity of this survey, of this study, as it is actually quite hard to measure in a quantitative way how happy an individual is. Thus, it means the survey is probably not, and it's not as representative or as accurate as the data shows. And another great evaluation point which directly contradicts what we're saying in our chain of analysis. So we've said when individuals have more disposable income, more real income, it means that they're going to be happier since they have an improved living standard. So they can demand more goods and services, and by demanding more goods and services, their living standards are going to improve. However, the data itself completely contradicts this. Why? Since individuals who make the least amount of money are the happiest, and as we make more money, well, we start off with a massive decrease as the income increases, and then as we make more money, happiness incrementally increases, but never gets to the same point. The way I would word that is saying, however, in evaluation, this depends on how increasing incomes actually decreases subjective happiness as shown in the figure. Quote the figure, maybe quote less than 10,000 and then 10,000 to 20,000 just to show that, pick up the application marks, and then go on to explain what we just mentioned. And yeah, that is of course more than enough evaluation. Here, since there's only 4 marks for evaluation, you can get away with 1 well-developed evaluation point, or if you have the time or you just want to make sure you secure the marks, just throw in 2, and that is more than enough to get 10 out of 10 on your 10 mark question.